Well, good morning, everybody. Here's a quick layout of today's forecast video as you're watching this animation focused on the Northwest, which is looking at some of the bigger storms in the Northwest yesterday and also some of the wildfires as you see it reset here. I want to talk a bit about some of the shifts we've seen in the rainfall pattern, both in our normal models and also the artificial intelligence model, which did a very good job with the current pattern. I want to talk about the increased risk of some thunderstorms that's shown up from the Storm Prediction Center. And then we're going to get out into a little bit of a kind of a forecast discussion about the way the temperature pattern is going to set up, keeping a lot of the heat really anchored into the south, but letting it expand at times in the plains as these two broader troughs flank, the United States, one in the northwest, one in the northeast. And at the very end of this, I'm going to stretch it out and give you a quick recap of the European model weeklies. I've got some questions about the pressure patterns it's predicting and why I think that we might see something a bit different than they're showing. And I also want to get out there, look at the NMME one more time, and also show you the new forecast for La Niña, which I think is the CPC really backed off on its strength, and I think there's some validity to that. And at the very end, if you stick around, I've got some stuff on South America, including some work I've done on the start of the Brazilian monsoon. So all that's ahead of us, and we're going to stop this right here and get right into these fires yesterday. As you take a look at it, large storm complexes rolling off the mountains. This is very common this time of year. They're very difficult to predict because they're initiated by the mountains and the differential heating that happens there. But you can see the large fires here that are north of the Snake River Valley, kind of near the Payette National Forest, and also here in the Salmon River Valley. So this was some very large fire activity here, and a lot of that smoke continues to get over into the northern plains as well. But as we look at the bigger picture, this storm complex this morning, we're waiting for the sun to rise over the top of it. That's really captured my attention because yesterday, as these storms came out of Colorado, they developed into a very nice broad shield of rainfall in this area that was desperately needed. We've talked a lot about Kansas and the need of rain in Kansas. And if we blow this up, you can see the scattered storms that were last night throughout parts of the West, locally delivering some heavy rain, a lot of lightning in them. And you can see this broad shield of precipitation hitting one of the driest states in the country compared to their historical averages. And this rain is desperately needed in this area. We watched quite a bit of rain that moved through parts of the Midwest yesterday, but the scattered showers moving over the Ohio River Valley last night and into parts of the Carolinas early this morning. But if we just take a quick look here, kind of a more zoomed in view, we can watch on radar here, again, starting late last night, going through this morning. There's a bit of a bowing segment at the leading edge of this. And I imagine some strong winds coming through here early this morning with this particular system right about there. So we'll have to keep an eye out on that one progressing farther this morning. I do want to show you some of the new lightning data because I imagine it was a pretty loud night last night getting into early this morning with these storms, but still throughout the Great Basin into the Northwest, quite a few thunderstorms continue to roll through this morning. Again, the big concern with storms like this is that sometimes the storm itself has too much dry air beneath it, very high base thunderstorms, and the lightning strikes the ground, but the rain doesn't get there. We always worry about these storms this time of year for starting fires in the western United States. But let's zoom back out here and just get a good look here through 6 a.m. this morning Central Time at the recent rainfall. So there in southern Iowa, this part of Missouri, even getting into southern Illinois yesterday, this was some much needed and very slow and gentle rain for some that came into this region and just really needed it. This was one of our drier spots if you remember yesterday's analysis. We can see into Oklahoma the very, very heavy rainfall that's come through just in the last 3 days. Also parts of Kansas, Colorado, a lot of the high and western plains picking up on some decent moisture. The rain that was over in the Carolinas here was not needed. Given what Debbie did last week, any additional rain here was too much, and so the last 3 days quite wet, and we can see the deeper low that has left the Great Lakes, Ontario, Quebec, and is out. We're going to watch another one form here very soon, so we need to keep a close eye on this. This morning, we do have the red flag warnings. We do have the air quality issues in the Northwest. We can see here that the excessive heat watches and advisories are all out through parts of Oklahoma, Texas, getting to Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. This will likely expand across the south as we go forward as well. And this, again, is one of my greatest concern areas for the risk of flash drought as we go forward. What did change, and I'll be anxious to see these maps in a couple of hours because I record a bit before the SPC does their mid-morning update. And this is where they've got their general risk of thunderstorms today, just a couple of areas under that marginal. But into tomorrow, they've increased in Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa the risk of the strong to severe storms. They now have a slight risk out for that corner. One area that's been hit repeatedly this year, right around Omaha and the parts of western Iowa, clipping this section of Kansas and Missouri. And then on the 15th, it's the majority of Illinois getting back into Missouri that the concern is going to be there for the risk of these strong to severe storms. Now, as I take a look at it this morning, I think the NAM was initialized well enough that we're going to go ahead and use it. There's some of the isolated showers. You can see the storm complex. It's a little bit off on its speed, but it's there. And maybe by 7 a.m., maybe it's getting closer. And then you can see the showers and storms still in the, throughout the Intermountain West here. So I like it. Let's go ahead and play it through the middle of the day. We're going to watch those heavier rains move out of Kansas into Missouri. The storms are going to pop again later today here. And we also are going to watch the storms in the northern part of North Dakota here as well. So by tonight, this is kind of what we're seeing in the model. So we're going to keep an eye on this region for the risk of the strongest storms. That's the same spot we've been watching lately. As we work our way into Tuesday, we're going to watch this boundary set up here that we could expect to see some locally very heavy rainfall. And just understand this is putting a stripe right through some of the drier ground that recently, just yesterday, saw some good rain. But this is hitting some of the drier pockets that are in the western Corn Belt all the way down to sections of the Mid-South here. More rain, a lot more rain is needed in this corridor, and unfortunately, the forecast models are not too generous on it. But playing out there to Wednesday afternoon and evening, and then it'll be that late night time period that we're going to keep a very close eye on the risk of the severe storms coming out of here in the Midwest toward Illinois. To the north, coming out of the Red River Valley of the North, all the way through this part of the upper Mississippi Valley into Wisconsin, we got to keep an eye on just widespread rainfall working its way through Wednesday night. But here will be likely a storm complex we'll keep an eye on. I don't imagine the model timing is right on this, but we need to keep an eye on this later this week. That would be our day 3 risk in terms of severe storms. Okay, I want to bring you up to speed on some satellite data with Ernesto. Ernesto was named yesterday. It's currently got 40-mile-an-hour winds, getting it enough to get that name and become a tropical storm. But the convection's rather deep, and honestly here on satellite looks organized enough that there's pretty good evidence this is going to continue to develop. We call these the Lesser Antilles if you're unfamiliar. The smaller islands here, the Greater Antilles, begin with Puerto Rico, go toward the island of Hispaniola, and over to Cuba. And these particular islands kind of hold a little special spot in my heart. I live down here on Antigua and Bermuda, these two islands, Bermuda being the most northeast of the Lesser Antilles. And so to see some of this deep convection here, I have quite a few friends that are down here, and it is the island of Bermuda. There's about 1,500 people on it, and a lot of them have never left the island. So this is some deep convection on a very flat island. So this is Ernesto, and right now the National Hurricane Center's got Ernesto maintaining its tropical storm strength, but becoming by Thursday a hurricane. But all of the evidence we've got suggests that this is going to go more toward Bermuda. The Bermuda high is shifting over toward the Azores, and there's broader troughs of low pressure that are really protecting the east coast of the United States. So the flow is wrong to push this toward the U.S. or to pull it toward the U.S., and I think that's been pretty consistent in the models. So using Tomer Berg's page, great page, I love this page, watching the super blend of the European model, the GFS, the UK Met, and the CMC, most evidence says that there is a very, very small likelihood that this system could get pushed toward the east coast of the United States. Maybe one ensemble member takes it over at Cape Cod, but the majority of them and the National Hurricane Center forecast keep this as a fish storm, as we often call it, just one that stays out to open ocean. Although it looks like it will be hitting Bermuda pretty hard, but Bermuda is a well-built island to deal with hurricanes. It gets hit all the time. So that brings me back to this kind of ongoing story that we've had about model trends lately. And I'm going to show you the latest WPC. So if you remember several days ago at the end of last week, the models were almost calling for no rain here except for the AIFS, the Artificial Intelligence Forecast. And as we progress forward in time, we now can see that models have really increased for Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, the heavy rainfall right in the heart of the Corn Belt here. And it's also increased into parts of Ontario, Quebec. It's also increased in the Northeast, with the greatest risk of this flash drought scenario setting up in the southern plains, getting over into the lower Mississippi River Valley, and possibly into parts of the Southeast that don't have all of the waterlogged soils from Debbie. Going from there to the national blend of models, it also increased the rainfall in these areas, same areas I just referenced. This is the 7-day outlook, and here is the 10. So there is one major difference, though, between these new 10-day outlooks. The national blended models, did you notice 7 to 10? Not a whole lot of additional rainfall happening here. But next Tuesday, there is some evidence that's best shown right now in the artificial intelligence model that we could have another little shortwave wiggling over the top of the ridge that's going to flatten out into Texas. And that's why the AIFS has picked up about days 7 and 8, which would be included now in the new 10-day forecast, wetter conditions here. And I just want to remind you something about these models. You probably noticed that the AI model versus the NBM, you feel like you lose a lot of detail. And that's just because the current AIFS is run at much lower resolution than the NBM. And on top of that, I use just a very simple plotting algorithm that does what's called a contour fill. So it takes the gridded data, contours it, which smooths it out even further. But in my new forecasting maps, which I will have finished by August, I put a hard deadline on myself to get these things done. You will be able to see the raw data kind of overlaid. So you can see I put out the precipitation numbers on top of this. And again, this is one model, but you can see that it is aggressively going over toward the wetter side given that extra wave. It is showing up in the dynamical models as well. Here's the European 7 to 10. See how it is increasing in that area where the blended model did not. And the GFS 7 to 10 is doing it as well. So 7 to 10. Take note that neither model is increasing the risk of a hurricane following Ernesto as we work our way toward that last week of August. But I think that last week of August opens things up again. We're going to have a discussion about that in just a few moments here. So what is it? Why did that change? Well, the same thing we talked about yesterday is in play. And it means working through the end of this week, there's a trough here, trough in the central U.S., and trough in the Northeast. And that's what's keeping that wetter pattern through the middle of this week, which is giving us the increased risk of the severe storms as we go forward, right? So that nothing's changed there. Even as we get into the weekend and the flow becomes very meridional here and opens up this ridge that's going to be in the central U.S., bringing heat pretty far to the north and letting it at times get back here, early next week into the plains. What changed in the forecast is this: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Now, it doesn't look like much, does it? But this broader trough is able to send out little weak waves. That little feature right there next Tuesday could initiate some storms in the northern plains. In yesterday's forecast, it didn't have that. This ridge was kind of much more firmly established, and we weren't seeing little shortwaves get over it. And that's why I told you, you get northwest flow out of a permanent ridge with no small shortwaves running its periphery. That's a dry scenario. And now what we see is next Tuesday, Wednesday, and really next Thursday. Did you see it right there? Look at that. This is all still the same. But take a look at that little shortwave. The ridge flattens, that is a ridge runner. So when we say that term, we're talking about these little shortwave features that roll around the periphery of the ridge. And if that guy goes right through here, it's going to increase the risk of those storms. Now, the bigger, broader pattern's still there. Trough and trough, and that's what's helping keep the Northeast wet and also cooling off the West Coast. This risk of flash drought and heat across the South is very well established in the models. It's been there for a while, and that is where we're tucking all of that hotness away down in the South. Now, I do see that as we get toward the end of the month, a couple of things changing. If this ridge does open, we will start to bring in warmer temperatures into the plains, encroaching on the Midwest, but staying anchored in the South. What you need to know is that this particular pattern giving us the heat coming back is not the same as mid-July heat if you're in the northern tier of the plains, southern Canadian prairie. So when I show in a few minutes the temperature pattern, I need you to know that when it's 5 to 8 degrees warmer than average in late August, that is not the same as early July. All right. So let's get in and see what the models are up to. We're going to compare the GFS on the left to the European on the right. And as we play this forward, there's the storm complex we talked about. That's going to be on day 3, increasing the risk of severe storms. There's Ernesto in both models. And then what we'll watch is that low curl up over the Great Lakes by this weekend. And that's going to become part of the trough that's going to keep the Northeast and the wetter side of things going through this weekend. But what we're keeping an eye on is the little features that wiggle through next Monday, Tuesday. See it right here in the European? Showing up quite clearly, and that becomes another low that goes right over the Great Lakes again by the time we get to next Thursday, dragging its moisture right through it along that front. So we've really started to see an increase in the forecast out there to day 10. So the models have increased here, and they've also increased the precipitation probabilities in these couple of areas, and that's what we're going to have to continue to watch. Now, if you remember, some of the forecasts for the end of August and the beginning of September, they were not this wet. And each time we get into the near range, the forecast has been trending wetter on top of those areas that have been wet, and it's been trending dry for those areas that have been drier. And I bet I got a new model run in here. I did. So let's go back and flip that back to the 0Z. But I do want to show you who's staying drier out to 10 days. We've continued to see this area. It has shrunk in size, but the highest probability of not receiving much at all in the way of precipitation, while the very high heat is on, has stayed down into parts of Texas. All right, so from there, I do want to just remind you that behind this tropical system named Ernesto, we're going to wait. The atmosphere has got a bit of a lid on the tropical Atlantic, given the repositioning of the MJO. And as a result, after Ernesto comes through, we're going to wait to see more tropical development when the MJO moves out of phase 1, 2, 3. Watch 1, 2, 3, and over toward phase 4. As it moves into this area, we're also going to move the suppressing wave with it, and that's going to start to help initiate better activity across the Atlantic. So I still think that the end of this month has an increased risk of tropical activity, but that's pretty far out in the forecast. So what do we see in the new purely week 2 forecast? Well, we know next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there's going to be some rain that moves through here. And I'm not so sure that the ensemble models have picked up on that very well. But after that, if we do keep a trough here and a trough there with a more open ridge with no shortwaves coming over it, that will give us some northwest flow through here that doesn't include the shortwaves. So it's just pure northwest flow and drier. The dryness in Texas is going to continue, but there could be more storms that stay here along the axis of that ridge coming off of the front range of the mountains into this area. So this does make sense, but we're wetter northeast, wetter east coast, wetter northwest, where the troughs are going to be, and that seems to be a pretty consistent factor in the models right now, and it meteorologically makes sense with what they've got. So what we now need to do is turn this over to a temperature discussion, and this is today's high temperatures. So major contrast where there's the cloud cover and rainfall versus where there's not, farther to the south, cool in the west, cool in the northeast, cool in the Midwest. It's only hot south. That's Wednesday into Thursday. Triple digit heat here, 70s and 80s farther to the north. As we get out there toward Friday and Saturday, see the warmth trying to build its way up here. But again, to be warmer than average only puts you in the mid to upper 80s, not the low 100s at this point in the year. The hundreds are kept pretty far to the south as we play this all the way out to next Monday. As we look at day 5 through 10, warmer than average conditions. Remember, this is when the pattern's got trough here, ridge, trough, and the heat is staying anchored in Texas, but it is starting to come off of the mountains. And that is where we're going to look at the CPC's update. We'll blow that up for you. Of their risk into week 2 of the flash drought scenario. That's what this color shading represents, and the excessive heat is here. And we can see that by looking at the day 10 through 15. So we're watching for the hot conditions there, but this region to the north where the temperatures crank back up, I'm not seeing this as a major heat stress going forward into the beginning of September, end of August timeframe. The European model is in agreement with that. As we start day 5 through 10 and just slide it out to day 10 through 15, the model keeps most of the heat anchored farther to the south, with warmth spreading back toward the north, but coolest in the west and cooler or near normal across the east. So I like how consistent some of these temperature forecasts have been with the way this pattern is going to shake down to finish this month. Speaking of finishing this month, there's one thing that's been bothering me about the forecast, and it's been primarily what's going on north of Hawaii, south of the Aleutian Islands. Now, for the last couple of weeks, if you watch every video, we've known that the European model has wanted to put high pressure here. But the first 10 days of August, the high pressure has been split, some of it going toward Canada, some of it coming here over this part of the open Pacific way off of Japan, but there, and even some of it in the Gulf of Alaska, but not here. There's been a low. The Bermuda high has been doing its thing, and that's been the main culprit behind helping Ernesto create these low pressure anomalies you see across the east. I show you this because every single forecast model run wants to take the Pacific high and make it stronger right where there's been low pressure for a while. So in other words, the model's attempting to predict something, and I've been making a case for it, right? I even told you, like, if this happens, we're going to get hot in the midsection of the country, yet it's not happened. The model keeps trying to produce this, and we've not been able to see it occur. So I'm just questioning it, but I want to tell you the model's been very consistent with trying to do that to finish August and start September. This is a 30-day outlook that goes to September 15th. And what's unique about it is if you come into the United States and look at the 30-day precip, it's trying to anchor all that heat and keep things very dry in this area, which means storms that will likely run the periphery of this and trough here and trough there. So I'm just going to ask, is this really going to be the case lasting all the way to... Now, we know in the near term it's hot and dry here, but I think in order for this to really verify in a big way, there has to be, that big ridge that's going to live between the, let's call it the Aleutian Islands and Hawaii. And I think that's just part of this. The other big wild card is September 15th is the peak of the hurricane season, and we've yet to get a big one coming out of the Gulf, and I think the Gulf is ready to do that. So I just want to make a point here that the European weeklies still leave me scratching my head a little bit. I'm a bit confused as why they're breaking away from persistence so much, and I just want you to know that. That's what we're looking at here. So we'll come back and continue this week with our near-term but long-term outlook. Now, if we skip over that and go to the really long-term, the CPC just released their new official forecast for the probability of La Niña. And last month, their forecast had the November, December, January timeframe at about 80 to 83%. So in all categories, they have changed, meaning that the risk of La Niña has come down a bit, the risk of neutral has increased. And so this is, I think, an important step going forward because, as I've noted, even though we have some cooler water here and there's some under this that could upwell, we're not getting full La Niña yet behavior. And we don't expect it. Let's be very clear on this. It's August. We don't have the full-on discussions about La Niña's influences until we get into the cold season. That's when it's going to have its strongest influence. But the latest thinking is that this one might come in a bit weaker than originally forecast. I still think the biggest things are we're starting to get some movement of the MJO coming in this direction, and it's these epicenters of heat that are really determining where our high and low pressure cells are forming, and that's affecting in between the flow across the United States, which we just reviewed in the model analysis. So I want to remind you of what some of the models are saying. The National the National Multi-Model Ensemble, NMME, is the model suite that I think is most aggressive on the development of La Niña. And as a result, it's September through November and then December through February precipitation forecasts are reflecting what typically happens with La Niña. Drier fall across a lot of the United States, except parts of the Northwest, and an active hurricane season. How this gets into the U.S. is going to be tricky. And remember, most of this time period is post-hurricane season, so a lot of October and then November is after the hurricane season. And then the winter forecast, just wet northern tier, dry southern tier, that's La Niña to the T. But I just want to let you know that this is one of the models that is more aggressive on the development of La Niña than others. Where this will also become very important is South America. And right now the dry season is still fully on. Just a 10-day forecast. Into week 2, heavy rains, parts of Uruguay, maybe into Rio Grande do Sul and along the Parna River Valley, but no early onset of the monsoon is forecast. And this gets us all the way out there to like the 23rd of August. So we're not yet into where this, I think, fully matters. What has been interesting, and I didn't pull this up here. Let's go to Grace. There we go. If we look to South America, now this data was on August the 5th. We're going to look at root zone soil. This is a percentile, meaning we're comparing this to historical past from 1948 to 2012. That's the time period over which it's compared. And you can see that our dry season was considerably drier than normal in several of these areas, so the root zone soil moisture is lacking. That is one of the reasons why I think there might be a bit of a delay in the onset of the monsoon. The European model is actually showing that right now, so this would be all the way out, 46-day outlook to September 27. Now remember, October is the critical month for planting pace in much of Brazil. So this would be any early planting pace is determined by the onset of the monsoon if it could come early. But we do see drier conditions in a lot of Brazil, Paraguay, most of Argentina as well. And this, I think, is reflective of the high pressure that's off the southeast coast of Brazil, just not yet cranking in the moisture out of the tropics. Also, the Atlantic meridional mode is very reflective of this type of precipitation pattern as well. But from there, I do want to show you the probabilistic forecast. Let me shrink this up so you can see all the model maps together. And if you just kind of squint and look at South America in each map, you'll then see why the ensemble average, which is up here, that's what we call the NMME. These are the multi-models in that map, has got the drier risks, and the probability forecast does show that we could have a little bit of a slower start to the South American monsoon. And that would follow some work I've been keeping an eye on. There was a paper published a couple of years ago, before the pandemic actually, that looked at the increased what we call vapor pressure deficit. And I pulled this out of a slide deck I share when talking about Brazil. And that research pointed that the dry season was expanding a bit. So August, September, October, we're getting an increase in what we call vapor pressure deficit. So that's an increase in a deficit, right? And so I wanted to see how robust this was in terms of precip. So I went out there and I used the ERA 5 data, and we looked at October's total precipitation. Now it's measured in meters, but we just need to see the data and its trend. And essentially, the month of October, when you look back at this trend line from 1970 to present, we've lost on average about 80 millimeters on average when you compare this time period to this. Now that doesn't mean some years we don't get the rain back and it comes in early, but the longer term trend is that we're looking at drier Octobers. So this will be critical to planting pace. I think it's going to be something the markets will be watching carefully, and I think it's going to be our next kind of big weather story with respect to global grain production. It'll be harvested in the U.S. about the time we're watching this, and let's keep an eye on it together. All right, that's all I got for you today. We'll just pick this up again tomorrow morning, and until then, have a good one. Thanks.